welcome to The Perspective. I am your host, Florence Armein. Human Rights Watch just released a report, The Harvest is in My Blood, Hazardous Child Labor and Tobacco Farming in Indonesia, where they found thousands of children as young as 8 years old working in hazardous conditions. We have with us today Joe Becker, the Advocacy Director of Children's Rights from Human Rights Watch, to talk to us more about this report, which has just been released. Joe, thank you for joining us on The Perspective today. So, in a nutshell, tell us about this report.
We started our research in September of 2014, and over the course of 2 tobacco growing seasons, we interviewed 132 children that have been working in tobacco farming in Indonesia.
Yeah.
These children were between the ages of 8 and 17, and what we found is that they are working under very hazardous conditions. One of the biggest concerns is exposure to nicotine. Half of the children that we interviewed reported that they had experienced symptoms that are consistent with acute nicotine poisoning. And those symptoms include nausea, vomiting, headaches, and dizziness. Nicotine can be exposed through the skin as workers are exposed to the tobacco leaves. And the children that we talked to were participating in the cultivation of harvest at all stages, from the planting through the harvesting to the curing and drying of tobacco. And at many stages of this process, they're surrounded by the tobacco leaves. Sometimes the leaves are, the plants are taller than they are when they're working in the fields.
And how long do they spend in a day of their lives in these farms?
It depends. The children are by and large going to school, so many of them are working for a couple of hours before school or after school to help out their parents, and then on weekends or school holidays they'll be working full days in the field. We also found that a lot of these small farming families will exchange labor with their neighbors. So for example, children may be working one day to harvest their father's tobacco, and then the next day they'll go to a neighbor's field to harvest their tobacco.
So we're talking about family-run farms here.
Indonesia is the world's 5th largest producer of tobacco, and there are 500,000 tobacco farms in the country. Most of them are very small family-run farms. So most of these children are working out to, help their families. Yeah. But what we found interviewing the children and their parents is that many of them had no idea how dangerous nicotine exposure can be, or exposure to toxic pesticides. There have been very few studies about the long-term impacts of nicotine exposure through the skin, but we know from the research on smoking that exposure to nicotine during childhood and adolescence can lead to problems with cognition and memory and brain functioning later in life.
Even the parents, and I assume you talked to the parents of 130 children as well.
We talked to dozens of parents and farmers and tobacco traders as well to get a full picture of what's happening.
What about the local administration?
We found child labor in 4 different provinces. 90% of Indonesia's tobacco comes from East Java, Central Java, and West Nusa Tenggara. And so because we're seeing it in multiple provinces, we see this as a national issue. So we've been talking to the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, the Ministry of Manpower, about what the Indonesian government should do at the national level to better protect these children from these hazards.
What about, I'm curious to know, you spoke to the parents, you spoke to the children, for you to produce this report. Did you also, were there any involvement from the local administration in East Java, Central Java, and Kalimantan?
No.
Sorry. You said there's no engagement with the local administration at all?
No, we primarily talk to the national authorities, the national ministries that we believe need to take action on the issue. And we also engage with the tobacco companies that have been involved.
Tell us about that.
So several months ago, we wrote to 13 different companies that purchase tobacco from Indonesia. We wrote to 4 Indonesian companies, and then 9 multinationals. So of the Indonesian companies, 3 of the biggest purchasers in Indonesia are Jarum, Gudang Garam, and Noyorono. Of those two, Jarum and Gurung Garam didn't respond to us at all, even though we wrote to them and tried to contact them multiple times. Noyorono really didn't give us very substantive information. The multinational companies, and the two biggest ones in Indonesia, are British American Tobacco, they own Bentel, and Philip Morris International, they own Semporna. We had been in contact with those two companies and other multinationals for about 3 years now because of investigations that we've done on the same issue, child labor and tobacco in the United States and Brazil, where they also purchase tobacco. So they responded to us with information about their child labor policies and steps that they are taking to try and address the issue. But from what we can see, neither the multinational companies and definitely not the Indonesian companies are doing enough to make sure that they're not producing products that use hazardous child labor.
Or are they doing anything at all to ensure? Are they putting a blind eye to the fact that these are family-run farms and where children are actually around these farms?
Most of the multinationals have policies saying that they will not use hazardous child labor. What we see are two problems with their policies. One is that their policies don't identify all of the tasks that are hazardous. So they may focus on harvesting, for example, and not the exposure to dried tobacco, which also has risks. So none of their policies go far enough to protect children. And then there are also problems in terms of monitoring, to really monitor the farms where the tobacco is produced, to be able to say whether or not children are putting their health at risk producing that tobacco.
Now you mentioned about Indonesia, the 5th largest tobacco producer in the world. Is this the same condition or applies or persists in other countries producing tobacco as well?
We've investigated 2 of the other big 5 producers, the United States and Brazil. And it's really interesting. In the United States, we found a lot of problems. Compared to Indonesia, which has good child labor laws, the United States has very poor child labor laws when it comes to agriculture. So we found children as young as 12 who are working legally under US law and also experiencing the same symptoms that are consistent with acute acute nicotine poisoning, the nausea, the vomiting, the headaches, the dizziness. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done in the United States. Now, Brazil, on the other hand, is really interesting because in many ways it's very similar to Indonesia. It relies on small family farms, but on the other hand, they've done a very good job of addressing child labor. And that's for a number of reasons. They have a very clear law saying that children under the age of 18 should not be involved in tobacco farming. And they back that up with penalties not only on the farmers, but also the tobacco companies that are purchasing the tobacco. And they've also done really widespread community education campaigns so that the farming families know what the risks are for children. And it's been very effective, and we think can provide a very nice model for Indonesia.
I was just going to ask you, I mean, like these are, it sounds like these are policies that can be undertaken by the government, not just the government, but stakeholders to ensure that we apply that or back that law up. You mentioned earlier Indonesia has a good child.
Indonesia has very good child labor laws. It prohibits hazardous work by children under the age of 18. Generally, it prohibits work by children under the age of 15. But we see some areas where it could improve.
Loose ends.
And there are 3 areas in particular. One is that the Indonesia has identified a list of tasks that are hazardous that children should not be doing before age 18. And in that list now it says contact with harmful chemical substances is part of it.
It's included.
But it hasn't specified that nicotine is a harmful
one of the substances.
Is one of the substances.
All right, we'll get back to talk with Joe Becker from Human Rights Watch after this short break.